everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Creators. I am your host, Reverend Dr. Sherry Pallas. Today, I am chatting with Josh Scott about keeping scripture in context, which is really important. Please remember to keep all comments and questions related to the show topic and that this is a safe space. Thank you for joining us, and I'm looking forward to all of your comments and questions. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe. If you're on Facebook, grant StreamYard access so we can see your name when you have a comment or a question. I want to give our regular shout outs to our top sponsors, Ruth, Kirsten, Michelle, Ray, and Heidi. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate your support. And if you would like to support me, you can go to sherrypallas.com, and there you will find literally dozens of ways to do it for as little as $3 a month. Thank you in advance, and thank you for welcoming us into your home and joining the conversation. I appreciate you all. Okay, let's meet our guest. Josh Scott is an author, pastor, and thought leader in the formation of more just and generous Christian faith. He is the pastor of Grace Point Church and the author of Bible Stories for Grown-Ups and Context. Welcome, Josh. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad to talk to you about this because I think that all of what we refer to as clobber passages or anything that's done as an atrocity in the name of God is always taken out of context, biblical context. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, the most hateful readings of Scripture really pay no attention to what was going on in the world, in the author's world, when those texts were written. And it sort of just becomes a way to find some sort of justification for a really hateful interpretation.
Using the Bible as a sword will kill so many people, and history has shown us that is exactly what happens. What is this general consensus of seeing this enormity of the problems why you wrote Context, or was there something else?
Yeah, one of the things I say in the book, I believe, is that the Bible and that certain interpretations of the Bible have a body count. Because of the way they impact people. I really wanted to write Context because I'm just going to admit it. I love the Bible for all of its problems, for all of its issues, for all the ways it has been distorted and misinterpreted. I still think there's something there that is significant and that matters, and that it deserves our taking it seriously. And what I find is that sometimes it's the people who take the Bible the most literally who aren't really taking it as seriously as it deserves to be taken. And so I wanted to write a book that dealt with, and in the book I deal with 6 particular texts, and I talk about how some of them are taken out of all of them are taken out of context. Some of them it's pretty benign. So like I do a treatment of 1 Corinthians 13, which surprisingly for some folks is not wedding liturgy. It's Paul trying to bring peace to a divided community. And so, I try to situate that in context. It's benign. I did a wedding last Saturday. They read that text and I didn't stop the wedding to say, well, this is a gross misuse of the, I just let it go. But then
let me interject you there because do you know Jennifer Bird? Dr. Jennifer Bird. She's been on my show a bunch of times. She was there at the Gooth with me. She said on one of my shows, oh my God, the problem with Corinthians 13. And then we couldn't follow up with it. And so I included in my book as the point of love. And she pointed out everything. And I was like, oh my God, I have to do an update to my book. Oh my God, I have to take it out. Saying that it was coming from a power position and it just completely enlightened me. Like I never saw it as so submissive until she pointed it out like that. It can be benign, but I assert in my book that it was used to justify my rape because that is what love meant.
And there is a way to read what that text says. That this is what happens all the time: is people with power and privilege come to the Bible, a text written by people largely without power and privilege. And I think about this every time I see a politician quote some scripture on the internet. And I'm like, oh my goodness, the people who actually wrote that through their blood, sweat, and tears, and then you take it and appropriate it and try to use it to further your agenda, which is it's just damnable. I think it's just a really terrible, harmful way to read the Bible. And there are other texts in there in the book that I deal with that are really, really malignant. And the last, Sodom and Gomorrah, maybe the most. And originally, when we laid the book out, I had intended to start with Sodom and Gomorrah. But as I was writing it, I thought we got to start with something a little. We got to work our way into this because it's such a serious text and one that has been so misused that I wanted to end up helping people build the skills as we go, so that when we end up at that text, it's not we're not introducing something new. We're just sort of doing what we've been learning throughout the book.
Yeah, and you refer to Ezekiel's where Jesus says that. I'm sure it's the the homophobia and everything related to it. It's really interesting to me that everybody relates Sodom and Gomorrah to homophobia, but not incest. That one kind of just goes away. It's focused on something that's not even right, being homophobia, when it was actually cruelty to migrants. Exactly what so many of our politicians are doing to people now is what the reality of Sodom and Gomorrah was.
Yeah, and a spoiler alert but in the book, one of the things I say is that the actual sin of Sodom being committed today is not, the LGBTQ plus community living into their full selves. It's the people who are trying to stop them from having rights. Right. It's the people who are, spouting xenophobia and trying to stir up hatred against immigrants. So this, the sin of Sodom is alive and well. It just isn't and has never been what people have thought.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, and I think a lot of it happens, at least in my churches growing up. The pastor would focus on one verse and really expand on that verse and say, what are they talking about? Where are they going? Without looking at the context, without starting at the context, saying, okay, this is why this letter was written, or that's why this book was in here. So when you focus on just that one verse and the power of that verse per se, it can be taken any way. It can be used as a sword or a bridge or something to that effect, but there's so much contextual basis that needs to be added that is often, I never heard any of that. It was always that one verse. Let's focus on this one. And it's usually about how much we are just complete pieces of shit and we need to praise and worship more.
Right. Isn't that sort of, I can remember growing up, most sermons, no matter what you were talking about, had to come down to that because you had to have the altar call at the end. Yeah. So we just, sort of the goal was, we just got to make you feel awful. And if we can make you feel awful, if we can make you feel like, that you have some sort of illness and we have the only cure, that's really good for business. And I think that's what we've done in Christianity for far, far, far too long.
Whatever's good for business. Yeah.
Which also explains why evangelicalism is off the rails. Yeah. And how they've ended up supporting somebody like Donald Trump the way they have is because it's what's good for business. And there's been sort of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And it's led to a really toxic situation, I think.
Well, I think the irony is that Christians are more resemble not Christians, we'll say evangelicals, but there's a lot more behind it than just the evangelicals, but they more resemble the Pharisees than they ever do Jesus. It's more focusing on Paul's word as opposed to the Beatitudes, focusing on the other books in the New Testament as opposed to the Gospels, because that gospel message doesn't fit power. It admonishes it. So in order to encapsulate that power, you have to go with the verses that work, and then things are taken out of context.
Yeah, and I would argue that they read and misunderstand Paul, because sort of the way we were trained, at least I was trained and might bring to read Paul, was you read Paul from our standpoint back through the Reformation, back through Luther and Calvin, and then you get to Paul, and then you get to Jesus, instead of starting with Jesus and then reading Paul through that lens. And when you read Paul through the Jesus lens, what I think the guy's doing is not. He's not reinventing the wheel. He's sort of expanding on an idea, which is Jesus is teaching in first century Palestine communities of people how to get together and bring the kingdom of God into the world. And Paul has this idea, well, there are people besides us who are oppressed and who are struggling under the empire. What if we expanded our welcome? So I think Paul really, rightly understood, doesn't come down with any of the positions that we've been taught he comes down with. We just hadn't been taught to read his letters well, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and going through the process with my book, and I've said this on so many shows, but I really developed a huge animosity to Paul. I really saw his ego at work when he was arguing with the disciples, and I know more, and reworking the definition of the apostles to include him and all of that. And unfortunately, if we are going to take things out of context, Paul's letters are probably the most used, besides Leviticus, of course. But I mean, those are the things that, those are talking about, the Inquisitions, the Holocaust, all of those types of things derive from Paul, a Pharisee, which I also think is a really interesting twist because of what Jesus said. So I think Paul, if anything, should be, well, I came up with, and I'm sure I'm not the originator of this, but the way that I now read the Bible is through a lens of love. If it does not make sense with replacing love with the term that is used for God, then it's wholly man-made. And in that view, I can get a lot of really good grace-given topics and lessons through the Bible, because it's really easy to distinguish at that point. You wouldn't say love says to go conquer this tribe and rape and kill everybody. Right. It would be really easy to go, okay, well, that's there's no love there. That's pure ego. That's conquering and all of those things. Did you come up with something similar as a lens to go, or did you just use Jesus?
Yeah, my lens, I would say, is does whatever we're talking about lead to human flourishing? And to take it a step farther, does it lead to creation flourishing? And if it doesn't, then I don't care who wrote it or who said it. It's not something we need to be hanging on to.
Right.
So yeah, for me, comes down to does this allow people to thrive? And I go back to the quote from Irenaeus, who said, "The glory of God is a human being fully alive." And so, because people will often push back, well, the Bible tells you what human flourishing is. I think we know in our bodies if we're flourishing. I think we know in our minds and our spirits and all of us, like we know. And there are lots of people who have had the Bible, been beaten over the head with it, and it did not lead to their flourishing. It actually was detrimental to them. And so, yeah, human flourishing is my North Star.
I guess I've recently realized how many preconceived notions we have about words. And so what would flourishing necessarily mean, right? If someone is judging someone from the LGBTQ community as harming their body, then there's where that judgment comes in, right? So where do you determine and define flourishing? Is it self-right?
Yeah. I think it's what leads to us being our full and whole selves. And so, for example, when people are hostile to and homophobic toward the LGBTQ plus community, they are actively working against their flourishing.
Good. I like that.
And so if we make that our goal, like how do we make sure that we are creating the context where everybody can flourish, can be their full authentic selves, can be healthy, can be, experience wholeness and goodness and peace. If that's our goal, then that makes a lot of the decisions we struggle with quite a bit easier.
Yeah.
Because it's either harmful or helpful, right?
Right. And I think that at the Wild Goose, I think because we were struggling with love, the word love, and what does that mean? And it's like, okay, well, is it sexual love? Is it romantic love? Is it parental love? How is this defined? And so many people view love as abusive, as corrective in a hostile way, because of religion. And the term that we collectively came up with was empathy. And that is the same thing as what you're saying for flourishing. It's caring about your neighbor. If you have too many hangups with the word love or don't really understand it, it just means caring about them, honoring them and who they are.
Yeah, and that so is so connected to the way we've been taught to see God, because I can not count the number of times, when I would say to somebody, "Well, God is love," they would say, "Yes, but God is also just."
Right.
And what's interesting is the assumption we have built in that for God to be just, what that ultimately means is God is a punisher.
Mhm.
When,
A judge.
but then we'll turn. And then, we'll talk about, well, God commanded genocide in the Bible. Well, God's ways aren't our ways, and His thoughts aren't our thoughts. Okay, I'm down with that. But here's my thing. I think yes, God's ways aren't our ways, and their thoughts are not our thoughts. But I do assume that they're better.
They should be, right?
That they're better. That they're more evolved and more advanced and more into wholeness. And so I think getting rid of the idea of a retributive God and embracing a God who, whatever God's justice is, it is not about punishment but restoration. It is not about getting even in vengeance, but it is about restoring and healing, and that transforms the whole idea of God for me. And that God is in the Bible, but then there are other examples of God in the Bible, which I think is important to just say. The God of the Bible is a character. It's this character being filtered through human experience, and
Mhm.
so there are times the character God behaves badly in the Bible. Why? Well, because that's a thing human beings put
It's our
on to the
nation.
divine. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I had an interesting tiny little backstory. My landlord is actually Saddam Hussein's nephew. And when my book was coming out, he can't stand Saddam. He's a really good guy, but he still is really struggling with the concept of love. And so he has three beautiful children. And I said to him, would you, doom your children to hell? And he's like, no, but I'm not God. And I said, so you're better than God? You're more
Oh my
loving than
gosh.
God? And it would give the, the outrage and stuff like that. But that's really what got me, was that if I would never do what the
Yep.
Bible or Christianity says that God did to my own child, then why would I praise, worship, give up my life, anything for something like that?
Absolutely. I get accused all the time on social media. People will say, "You're just trying to be nicer than God. You're just trying to be more loving than God." To which I always say, "Look, if I am more loving, more compassionate, or more generous than your understanding of God, it is time to trade up.
Right,
You need a better God,
right.
because I promise you, whatever that reality that the word God points to, I just believe they are far more generous, compassionate, kind, and full of love and generosity I could ever be." So it's just interesting to me that people will do that, right? It's sort
Yeah.
of that it's showing their cards a little bit,
Mhm.
that they have an understanding that their view of God may not be great, but they feel like they're stuck with it. And so I think part of the work is helping people realize you're not stuck with the view of God you inherited. You
Right.
can change that. You can let some things go. You can embrace something else. That is actually part of healthy spirituality. Healthy religion is doing the thing that we were called to do but misunderstood in our tradition, which is to repent, which doesn't mean to feel awful about yourself. It literally means to change your mind, to think differently. And so I love when people tell me to repent. I'm like, I do all the time. I really try, because I'm always interested in what I need to change my thinking on.
Right. I mean, and you really, if you believe your God is this asshole, I always say it's, someone who I would avoid in this life, then it enables you to do so. It enables you to be an asshole. It enables you to judge and embody all of the things. It doesn't force you or make you even want to be a better person. When I left, when I officially dumped religion, I literally became a better person as opposed to being judgmental, because now I focus on love. And if, that is my check. What could I do to be more loving? How could I
Mhm.
handle this in a more loving way? Not what is God thinking? What does the Bible say? It goes all back to love. And
Yep.
the dogma just disintegrates because if that's the way it is. And I say in my book that if you did a Venn diagram of all of the religions, they would all intersect at love and let go.
Hmm.
Let go also gets taken out of context and more of a surrender type of thing as opposed to let go. And
hmm
that's what's in the Lord's Prayer. That's what's in, go with the flow. All of the, we all say it differently. But those are the two things that matter. So no fear and love.
Yeah. And, I just have so many, I have this vivid memory in the years after 9/11. Somebody I really looked up to saying to me in a conversation, there were times in the Bible when God commanded his people to commit genocide, and God may command us to commit genocide against Muslims.
Oh
And
my God.
I was very early in my process, but I
Wow.
just like, oh, that's awful. No, God will not command you to do that. And one of the most important questions we have to wrestle with is God violent? Because to your point, if God is violent, and if God uses violence to get God's will done, then that gives us cover and excuse to be violent.
Exactly.
But if God is radically nonviolent,
Hmm.
and if God's love is radically nonviolent, then to quote Tertullian, when Jesus disarmed Peter, he disarmed every Christian forever.
Right.
Right? That if God's love is a nonviolent restorative love, then we have to put away our fists and figure out how to live differently together.
It's so easy to retaliate. It's so reactionary. It doesn't require any conscious thought. And that was also one of the things where I was like, hate is lazy. It's
Yep.
it's very energy consumptive, but it's lazy. Do better. I mean, I always use my driving because I'm not a good person with road rage, and if I'm reactionary because someone you just tried to kill me on the road, that's easy. I start cursing, I start waving my hands instead of being conscious and thinking, I wonder if they're having a bad day. They must not have seen
Yeah.
me, and all of those things. So I'm constantly checking myself with that and going, that wasn't very loving, Sherry. And I think that's what makes it holy, right? It isn't just repetition, it's conscious thought. It's actually planning and making sure that you are walking in a loving manner.
And for those of us raised in a really conservative religion, we were sort of indoctrinated to always be in fight or flight mode,
Yeah.
because there's always something to be afraid of. I often say that I was given two things religiously, um, and the people who gave me these things were doing the best they could, and it's what they were given to.
Yeah.
But fear and certainty. The problem with that is fear. I don't need. We don't make our best decisions when we're afraid, and
Right.
certainty we can't have.
That's
But
it.
when you're constantly taught to be afraid, the devil's behind every corner, or those people over there represent, what they're doing is of the devil, and so there's just always this fear, and so we're always in reaction fight mode, and it's just we don't make our best decisions, we don't show up the best way we possibly can in the world, and that cortisol just constantly going through our system is not good for us all the time.
A friend of mine who read my book asked me, there's certain things where information came to me that caused me to doubt the Bible's inerrancy, which is what I was taught, from God, fully inerrant. Um, and she said to me, what made you absorb that information? What made you not go, oh, that's not faith, that's not any of those things?
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing I could come up with was just pure shock. I also was really embarrassed because of the beliefs that I had held. What do you tell people, or how do you get around people shutting down the information as opposed to opening up and wanting to do better and wanting to be more loving?
Yeah, if people start that sort of, either shutting down or being angry and reactive, I just will sort of, back off the conversation a little bit, because they're not going to. I think one of Jesus' teachings is don't force things on people that they are not ready for. And so, one of the lessons I learned from Brian McLaren years ago was, when you're in one of those situations and somebody comes, with something back where you're just clearly in very different places, just don't argue. Just say, wow, I see that differently. Maybe we can talk about it sometime, and move on. When it's otherwise, when people seem to be interested, it's scary. The whole process of realizing that most of what you were taught has no basis in actual reality when it comes to the Bible.
Right.
It's scary. There's a grieving process. You go through all the stages of grief, sadness and anger, and sometimes you visit them more than once. You go from stage back to stage. It's not linear. It's way more, circular. And so I just try to make space for people to feel what they feel, to ask the questions they need to ask. For me, and I try not to respond flippantly, but somebody asked me once, what would you say to somebody who says that, no, the Bible is totally inerrant and fallible. It doesn't contradict at all. Everything in it agrees with everything else. It's monovocal. It's one author. What would you say to that person? I would just invite them to actually read it. And I mean, just sit down cover to cover and start reading it and just notice where there are differences. Notice where things don't match up. Notice where things are repeated, but strangely. Notice, and if you pay attention, and to me, all of that stuff makes the Bible far more interesting. That what we have is I don't use the language of contradiction when it comes to the Bible, simply because to use that language makes it seem like the Bible should all say the same thing and all agree. And I don't think it should. It is the collection of wisdom and experiences of our spiritual ancestors over a long period of time. So of course we're going to find moments where part of the text pushes back on, and one of the chapters in the book is on the book of Ruth, and how the book of Ruth is actually a pushback on another narrative that was going around in the time that it was written. And so within the canon of Scripture, you have this particular thing that was going on in the period of Ezra, Nehemiah. They were doing this reform thing. And the book of Ruth is a gentle but firm pushback on where Ezra and Nehemiah landed. And both of them exist within the canon of Scripture together. I think that's how it's meant to be. That it's supposed to be a conversation. And then that gives us permission to join our voices with the conversation, right? Like in the text, we see our spiritual ancestors going back and forth, and then we enter the dialogue too, and bring our wisdom and what we've learned over time. And that just makes the Bible way more interesting, I think.
Well, but it contradicts inerrancy, right? And I love that, because that's the way I look at the Bible now. I look at the Bible as people trying to figure out God, trying to figure out, how we're doing this, and it's not necessarily linear, like you said, but it is people just trying to figure it out. I addressed in my book that at one point potatoes were a sin, and so you have these different beliefs and you have these different things that come together, but it is a process. When you say it's inerrant, when you say God has done this, then evil kings and rape and all of that becomes divine in some way. When you when you make the book divine, technically it's idolatry too, but when instead of looking at it as how did these people learn, what did they come up with, how can I learn from their mistakes, that puts the sword down. That says, okay, let me learn from people who really screwed everything up and thought that this was the way things were going, and how they ended up trying to be more loving.
Yep. And I'll never forget, it's probably been 10 years ago, being in a small group talking about something, and somebody quoted a passage. They said they were quoting Paul. It was actually from one of the disputed letters. So, but I just said, well, look, I don't think Paul wrote that one, but if he did, I disagree. And they said, whoa, you disagree with the Bible? Like, yeah, sometimes. And you do too. You just don't know it. Because when you do you believe that swords should be beaten into plowshares, or should the plowshares be beaten into swords? Both of those commands are in the Bible. And we have to decide that they're both in the Bible. And we have to decide which one is going to be normative for us. So the Bible actually doesn't let us be lazy. It actually kind of says, if you're going to engage with me, you're going to have to make some decisions, because you can't, it's like you're trying to do everything the Bible says or agree with every position the Bible takes is like trying to play Twister, and like you just run out of arms and legs. You just can't go to all the places.
Yeah, it would be truly schizophrenic, because you would be going from one side to the other. You would be going from an eye to an eye to turn the other cheek.
Yep.
I always use when, especially online, someone is attacking me. I always use, well, why are you talking to me? Because I'm a woman and technically I'm not supposed to be talking. And also, would you kill your children if they were disrespectful, as said in Deuteronomy? And that usually goes, wait a minute, I didn't even know that was there. So you have these types of things where it's easy to go, I know you don't agree with the whole Bible because of these things that you probably didn't know that were there. Before I understood the totality of the Bible and that it wasn't inerrant and it wasn't God's voice directed towards man, I was certain too. And my certainty turned into total embarrassment. Like, wow, it was, the saying, you don't know what you don't know. And learning what I didn't know so much was embarrassing. And I think that's part of the cognitive dissonance that we all go through when we start to really go, holy crap, I was listening to people instead of love. I was listening to pastors with their own agenda, no offense, but
Sure.
not, as opposed to finding out how to be a more loving person in this lifetime.
Yeah, and I think that since I can look back on, I'm really glad when I started preaching that everything was recorded on cassette tape, because that means a good chunk of that problematic past of my sermons doesn't really exist. I know cassettes are coming back, but I don't think anybody kept them, thankfully. Because we all have, like, I can look back on things I've said, in sermons 20 years ago and just think, gosh, I can't believe, I wish that kid knew better. But you don't know what you don't know. And when you know better, you do better. Right. And so, I've felt that embarrassment too. I think we also, I think about this with our spiritual ancestors, or even our ancestors too. I mean, there's a certain amount of, they don't know what they don't know either. Yeah. And so being able to say, we all have a little bit of, embarrassment. There's plenty to go around for things we've said and done in the past. And now we're going to move forward and we're going to do better because we've learned and we've grown. Yeah. Yeah.
It shows growth. I mean, if, there was a point in my life where I would say, oh, I don't regret anything. And now I look back at that person and go, oh, you were so dumb. Growing is what the point is. And there should be regrets, because if there aren't regrets, that means you don't. I mean, I wouldn't regret things that I've done because it led me to the person that I am now. I get that whole cliche. But if I hadn't learned from those screw ups, then I wouldn't be the person I am now.
It's holding that tension of, if I had a time machine, I don't think I would change it.
Yeah.
But I regret. I regret that I didn't, I didn't advance sooner. This is really, really dumb, but there's a movie called We're the Millers. I don't know if you've seen this movie. But in the movie, there's this guy with a tattoo that says no regrets, but it's spelled wrong.
Yes.
And Jason Sudeikis' character looks at him and says, not even a letter? We all have regrets. And also somehow all of that, we should. And all of that somehow also helps shape us. Yeah. So it's learning to hold that, to not let it destroy us or derail us, and yet allow it to be some sort of impetus and energy that helps us do better, so that we don't keep repeating the same regretful behavior and perspective and postures and such.
Well, I think a mistake only occurs when you fail to learn from it. If there are no mistakes if you are able to learn and grow from it. But I think a lot of people go, no, like, while I still get the heat and the prickly heat when I'm wrong, throughout my body and stuff like that, like, oh God, I screwed up. It's no longer life ending for me. It's like, what, I'm human. I did the best I could with the situation that I have. I've made every apology that I can make. I tried to make it right. And then let's go on. Holding on to that certainty also fails growth. It just completely prevents it.
Yeah. And because the stakes in the religion I grew up in were so high. Yeah. It was my eternity. It was somebody else's eternity. Right. Like, I really don't know how we ever slept at night. And actually, between growing up in a tradition at one point that believed you could lose your salvation as easy as you could lose your car keys.
Mhm.
And then combined with, so I could die at any moment and go to hell for an unconfessed sin. Jesus is likely coming back at any moment. I just remember having so many sleepless nights. And even after my theology changed, my body had gotten so dysregulated in terms of sleep that even as an adult for decades, I've struggled. And I'm at a really good place with that now. But when I went to a sleep doctor, he said, "Why do you think you've struggled to sleep your whole life?" And I just went, "Here." And I told, I laid that all out for him. And he just looked at me and went, "Yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it." So, part of it is also being able to work all that stuff that has built up in us over years. It doesn't just go away overnight.
Um,
And so it has to be processed and healed and dealt with. And that takes some time, I think.
I mean, I am almost 30 years into deconstructing, or 25. And I still, if there's like everybody's off the roads or something, I still go, oh God.
Did it happen?
Oh, that's ridiculous. But it is that instant instinct. I mean, and the thing with fear is it spreads, right? Fear is totally contagious. I remember being like 7 or 8 years old and seeing a red sky and freaking out and getting all of the neighborhood kids to start praying the sinner's prayer. And I mean, I spread fear to everyone, and it was just a really magnificent sunset. But that fear had been, so overtaken me that, the red sky was it's, my pastor used to say every weekend, it could be today, but let's hope it doesn't, happen until after football's over every Sunday.
Yeah. I remember as an elementary school kid, it sounds like we were pretty similar. Every year, right before Christmas break, I would do a hard push on my friends to get saved because I was convinced that every year Jesus was going to come back at the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve. I had no idea that time zones were a thing, and that I guess Jesus would probably come back in Israel on Israel time, not on I grew up on Eastern time. Uh, so I can just remember. I remember watching Dick Clark and the balls dropping in New York, and they're counting down, and I'm just going, "Please don't come back! Please don't come back! Please don't come back!" Because the image of God or Jesus I'd been given, like the only thing maybe worse than going to hell forever was going to heaven forever and being with somebody who's just so darn cranky and so angry and so like I don't know which one do you pick. Which one do you choose?
Well, they say, due to Christianity, all the cool people are in hell anyway. So,
yeah.
And there's nothing but Karens up there. And I don't want, but people say, well, what if you're wrong? It's like, okay, well, I will always err on the side of love. And if I am wrong, and I keep hitting my microphone, sorry about that. And I get to this heaven and this God is really, this asshole that I've tried to avoid my whole life, we're going to have some words. We're going to, it's not someplace I'm going to want to be. I don't want to be around people that hurt other people. I don't want to be around people who don't care and look at law as opposed to love. I mean, Jesus is still my main guy because of that. When someone starts throwing me laws, I just go, you know what, they've changed. Nothing has stayed the same. I mean, adultery is okay now in evangelicalism. So,
well, and what I often when I get that, like, what if you're wrong? I'll say something similar, which is like, if you're right, if the way you're thinking about God is right, then I would choose hell in protest.
Yeah.
But here's my gut: I'm wrong about something, about lots of somethings. I don't know what I'm wrong about, or I would change that. Right? My conviction is that where I'm wrong about God or any of this, it is not because I've gone too far into love. It is because I have not yet gone far enough.
Right.
And so it's not that I'm trying to make God a nice guy. It is that God is inviting us to move forward, and we do that kicking and screaming sometimes.
Right.
So I'm just that I really do trust that. Like I don't trust that I'm right about everything. I trust that where I'm wrong, it's because I haven't gone far enough.
Yeah, I really like that. On my mother's deathbed, she started freaking out about her beliefs. And I had to reassure her that she just tried hard enough. It wasn't, that because she was like, what if I didn't believe the right stuff? What if I did, what if something else was right? And I said to
Yeah.
her, just the fact that you tried so hard. I mean, even to the point of disowning me and family members and friends and everything, isolationist theory beyond, she still tried really hard to be a godly woman. And again, if that's not honored, then I'm gonna have issues.
Yeah. And if somebody who's completely irreligious, who lived well and
Right,
did beautiful good in the world, if they don't get included because they didn't sign the right doctrinal statement, I'll go with them.
right.
I'll go with them. They understood better than God, if that's actually how it works. I just don't think that's how it works at all.
No, I mean, and that was kind of my path as a teenager when I was like, wait a minute, this can't be right, because I was told that my best friends were going to hell, and it was like, wait a minute, they're good people. How just because they don't go to church, they weren't, all of this, then this God would doom them? That was the first time I really started to doubt, like, how can this be good? How can this be whole? How can it be so obsolete?
Yeah, Christians aren't good people; they're just forgiven, or it's not about being good. I think we just said that because we had to somehow make sense of why our lives were not looking like the life of Jesus.
Mm,
So we needed some way to assure ourselves that even though we weren't, some of us weren't living in the love of God toward other people, that we still had to somehow be right and okay. And the way we did that as well, it's not about being good. It's just about being, a believer. It's about believing the right things, and that's what.
it's such a stance of supremacy. It is so
Yeah,
egotistical to
yeah,
say Christians aren't perfect, but we're forgiven. I mean, it
yep,
really, all of the stuff that, well, we're better than you, God's chosen children, tribes, all of this stuff. We have been fighting like a family since the dawn of man to try and prove that we are the favorite kids of the bunch. And it's all ego. It's, to say you can't have love and a destructive ego. You cannot have love and say that I need to be separate from someone. And that's the way the ego usually works, is to separate us. We can use the
yeah,
ego for good. Like, nothing fills my ego more than feeding the homeless now, or talking to them and doing those things. But when we have to be God's favorite, people die.
yeah. That whole scarcity mindset, where there's only so much to go around, and we have to get ours, because if somebody else gets something good, that's taking away from us. And just the whole idea of, comparison. I think about that story in John 21, where Jesus is appearing to the disciples on the beach, and he has this conversation where he reinstates Peter. Do you love me more than these? And Peter says, I love you. And then he says to Peter, basically, you're going to die for this. And then Peter looks at the disciple Jesus loved, which also, what a flex, right? What a flex, for all time's sake. Runs faster than everybody else. He's the disciple Jesus loved. What a flex.
And possibly
Peter, look,
his gay lover, but yeah.
Peter looks at him and goes, what about that guy? And Jesus, like, what about that guy? What is that to you? What if he lives until I come? What if? That's not the point. The point is, I've given you some things to do. And that comparison, when we start comparing ourselves to other people and other groups, and it just really ends up taking the joy out of being human and being a lot. I mean, some days when I have, days are really good, and there's a beautiful breeze and the sun's perfectly setting, and I'm just like, what an unbelievable gift it is to be here. We could not have been here. And 14 billion years ago, things could have gone wildly different.
Yeah.
Millions of years ago, the asteroid could have missed, and dinosaurs would be doing this. And what a gift to be here and to spend our brief time on this place, in this planet where we are gifted to be, comparing ourselves and being in competition with other people. What a just a sad way to spend it, when we could spend it enjoying it, loving one another, and just doing all the good we could. I mean, it's just a better way to live.
Comparison is the thief of joy, and Jesus really put the onus on us. I mean, it was gouge out your eye. You have the log. I mean, continually saying, don't worry about anyone else, just worry about you. And again, the Pharisees were the ones that were in everybody's business, and are you breaking the law? Are you breaking the law? And that's what so much of religion has become now. It's not the onus is on us. It's not personal responsibility. It's blame the bad guy, blame someone else, those damn migrants. Or, I mean, my mom would say, if you're sinning, you're putting my salvation in jeopardy. And
Wow.
so, again, work on you, Mom. Don't worry about me. I'm not going to send you to hell. You are. All of this stuff. So just to have some personal accountability again for what you actually do as opposed to believe could change everything.
And the realization that if my faith teaches me to do something or not do something, that doesn't mean it's binding or normative for every human on the planet. It's normative for me.
Right.
Which is what the big concern with Christian nationalism is, that it's essentially saying, no, this is what our faith teaches, and so we're going to make it normative for everybody. No. If your faith tells you don't do that, then that doesn't mean not anybody else can't do it. It means you, as a part of your faith, you don't do that. And so I think it's, worrying less about what people who aren't a part of our church. And this is one of the things people will say, why don't you criticize other religious groups? You criticize Christians a lot. Well, because I am one.
Right. I can.
I don't go criticizing I criticize my own community because I am one, and because I love it and I want to make it better. You think back to one of the accusations people levied against MLK was, oh, he's not a patriot. No, actually, he was deeply patriotic. He loved his country enough to call it to be its best self. And I think that's what, so I don't think I'm not anti-Christian. I am one. But I also want my tradition to be the best it can possibly be, because it's going to be around for the foreseeable future. Christianity is with us. I think it should be the best it could possibly be, and leave the world better than it found it.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise it's just a clique, right? It's just a high school clique of judgment and all of those things. It's
at best. At worst, it's going to blow the planet up.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, at worst, this left behind, this fetish for the end of the world is going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy if we're not careful.
One of the things that really became evident to me in my journey and writing the book was that oh God, I just lost my train of thought. You only with politics and religion is there no variance, right? It's God. There's only one God. There's only one way to God. When there's not one of anything on this planet, there's always dualities. And I say, thank God that this doesn't apply to the food we eat or the shoes we wear or even our shampoo, because my shampoo is not going to work for someone of color or someone with we allow all of these variances, but demand a singularity with God that created all of these variances supposedly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see how that can ever be reconciled.
And when I talk to Muslim friends or Jewish friends or atheist friends or pagan friends, Wiccan friends, people who think differently than I do, who have different set of lenses for the world, I always learn something.
Right.
The encounter always leaves me feeling enriched in some way, and it helps my own faith in some way too.
Yeah.
Helps it expand. So yeah, the idea that, can you one of the things I often think is, just kind of ridiculous, is this sort of pressure you grow up with, which is, at least in my upbringing you did, which is there is one person God has for you to be with in the world.
Yeah.
And only one. And if you don't find them out of all 7-8 billion people, fortunately they grew up in the same neighborhood as you, or they went to the same college as you. Just, that pressure, there's only one. The idea there's only one right way to be religious, or there's only one right set of doctrines. And aren't we just fortunate that we found it? We found it.
And
can you imagine if somebody else had found it?
Yeah. I'm the one that found it.
I'm better than you because I found it.
Right.
Yeah.
But as a woman, it was the man for you will approach you. So as a woman, it was any man who was interested in me was divinely appointed. And even if I didn't like him, I still had to submit. So
Ugh.
they get all this, toxicity and say, well, I mean, my husband was a total evangelical, so was I. And he would say, but you have to submit. What is wrong with you? And it pushes all of those things into shame and control and submission, where we should have body autonomy to say, this is, I am a child of God. I have,
That's right.
I'm not subjected to you or your hate or your power or your greed.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. We've made
Well,
it way too complicated.
right? Right? I mean, I swear that the 613 commandments are just a line of people going, but what if this happens? Looking for excuses to not love, but it's a Canaanite. Oh no, you don't have to worry about the Canaanites. All of those things are just excuses to go, okay, let's stop being loving.
Yeah. Yeah. And always bringing it back to, when Jesus is like, boil the whole thing down. He's like, oh, it's easy. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
Which just sort of, and if you're confused, also love your enemy. And if we're doing those things, then really we're cultivating a much healthier, more beautiful planet where everybody gets to take up their space.
Yeah. I mean, the only deterrent would be someone viewing love as destructive or punitive.
Sure.
But I will always err on the side of compassion and empathy and those types of things, regardless of what I believe.
Yeah. And, I think that so often religious folks get hung up on holding onto a word.
Yeah.
When in reality, when I listen to some people describe, I have friends who are atheists, and when I listen to them describe and talk about life, they're talking about wonder and beauty, and I don't care what you call it.
Right.
Wonder and beauty are good, and they're wonderful, and they're gifts. And however you think they got here, making space for them in your heart, that's a thing that makes us better people. So why in the world would we sit around and debate whether some G word had something to do with it when
I use quotes.
we're really, it's the experience, right? It's
right.
Experiencing them. It's reality. And I think, there's Elizabeth Barrett Browning has this poem where she says, and this is a bad paraphrase, but every bush is on fire. All the bushes are burning. And those who see it take off their shoes, and those who don't sit around and pluck blackberries. Now, I like blackberries. I grew up picking them. But there's something to that, right? Like where and I think healthy religion and healthy spirituality, what they can do when they're really healthy is they can help us create an awareness that all the bushes are burning, that every life is sacred, that every human being is a child of the divine and deserves dignity and respect and access to food and water and healthcare and all of those things. It can help us do that.
Yeah.
Right. Religion should expand us, not shrink us.
Right.
And so often when we're so concerned about getting it wrong or getting it right, religion has a shrinking effect on us.
Mm-hmm.
When really it's, the goal is that this thing would expand us to ever be more embracing of God and one another and ourselves.
I actually wish your church was closer. I might even attend it. Okay, so let's push some of your stuff. Let's see here. So these are all your books. Context is the latest.
Yep.
Bible stories for grown-ups, parables, putting Jesus' stories in their place, and then a context leader guide out of context too.
Yeah, so both Bible stories for grown-ups and context also have leader guides and a DVD series that goes with them. And parables will too. I'm actually recording the videos for that tomorrow. And parables will come out in February, and it's just I'm dealing with what are parables, and then showing I choose some very specific parables of Jesus to kind of point out where I think we've read them out of context, and actually that reading has reinforced things that Jesus was doing the opposite of.
Love that.
And so I'm excited for people to read it. And really enjoyed the process on that one.
Okay, well, we are almost done. Thank you so much for this conversation. Any final words, and where can people find you?
Yeah, so people can find me on the socials. So joshscott.online is my Substack. So if you're interested, I haven't sent anything out in a while because I've been writing a book, but there's new content coming soon.
I
You
love
can
that.
subscribe for free there. On all the other socials, I'm at Josh_A_Scott on Instagram, on the site that should not be named, on Threads. And I'm also on Facebook. So yeah, connect with me. I would love to always make more friends. Yeah, I love new friends.
Exactly.
So
Build a bigger table.
that's right.
And then here is a list of his books again. Let's see, we have one more comment. Thanks, Heidi. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Sandra. I loved this show. This was great. I could talk to Josh forever. I'm going to send you backstage and close the show. Thanks again.
Thanks.
Oh, you know what? I think I forgot to add that. These are his books. Go see them. Sorry. So another great show. I love learning things and your inputs and talking to fantastic people about how we can be more loving. Next week's show is with the divorced virgin from Instagram, and we are talking about the purity culture and all the trauma that comes with it. Don't forget to check out my book. I want to hear your thoughts. There it is. I want to hear your thoughts. And if you like the show, share it, like it, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks again for watching. Have a wonderful week. And as always, walk in love. Mwah.